Hi, I'm David here, and welcome back to the channel, where we're looking at life and spirit through the automatic writings of early 20th century medium James Padgett. In the last three midweek videos back in December, we looked in turn at three messages given to James by John Carlyle, who was a prominent US politician towards the end of the 19th century. The second message, which we looked at in video 2.15, was one of three messages given to James on the evening of March 7, 1916. All three of those messages are from people who passed to spirit and who found that they had unexpected challenges to overcome in terms of their spiritual condition and where that put them when they left this world behind. The first of those three messages was from Judge Louis O'Neill, and we looked at his message in video 2.13 before we got into the messages from John Carlyle. So today we're going to look at the last of the three messages given on that evening in March 1917, which was from a man by the name of Frank Davis, who was a boyhood friend of James Padgett's during his earthly life. Frank begins his message as follows: "I am your old friend and chum, Frank Davis. Well, I am glad to be able to write you, a thing when on Earth I never expected anybody could do. And it is only recently that I learned that such a method of communication could be used." A useful little reminder there that we don't suddenly know everything just because we pass to spirit. We start with who we are when we pass, and the process of learning and growing carries on from there. Frank, during his earthly life, never heard of communication by automatic writing, and has only recently found out about it. And naturally, having found out about it, he wants to give it a try. So he has presumably approached James Padgett's band of spirit helpers and asked if he can communicate. We've seen in earlier messages that James has a band of people in spirit who are tasked with supporting and developing his mediumship and gatekeeping in terms of who is allowed to speak through him. This is true of all mediums, although not all are as consciously aware of their guides as James Padgett was. At this point, James appears to ask Frank Davis how he is, which is a natural reaction to hearing from someone you've not communicated with for a while. We don't tend to have James's questions to his communicators, as he generally just asked them verbally. But Frank replies, "I am quite happy now, but when I first came to the spirit world, I was in considerable darkness and suffered some. As you may know, I was an ordinarily good man when on earth. By that I mean I never had any really bad or vicious habits, which a great many men have, and I loved my wife and children very much, and died loving them." So Frank recalls himself as a pretty average guy when he lived upon the earth, and not shy of saying how much he loved his family. Yet he still experienced some darkness when he passed to spirit. He also believed in God, although he does say that "you also know that I was not what was called an Orthodox Christian, having imbibed my beliefs from my father. But I believed in God, and also that he would not be severe on me for my shortcomings when I should come to stand in his presence. But I know now that there were other things that I should have believed and experienced in order to fit me for a condition of happiness, which I firmly expected would be mine." So Frank says he was a somewhat unorthodox Christian. He doesn't say exactly what was unorthodox about his Christianity, but he clearly wasn't into the idea of God as vengeful or harsh. So he expected to get off pretty lightly for any shortcomings he might have. But he says he knows now that there is more to it than this, and that there are other things he should have believed and experienced. So Frank gives us a hint that the things we believe and do make a difference when we pass to spirit. And he goes on to confirm this in what he says next. I have found that belief is a very important thing, both on earth and in the spirit world, and that these creations of the mind have a wonderful influence in determining the happiness, or the contrary, of a spirit in this life. People in spirit tell us time and again that thoughts are real. In this world, during our earthly life, we need to express our thoughts to make them real in a way other people can perceive. We need to voice them, write them, act on them by doing or creating the things we imagine or just think are important. In spirit, we do not need to go through this process because our thoughts are directly real. So people in spirit perceive our thoughts because in the spiritual planes, our thoughts are as real as those of anyone in spirit. It's just that no other embodied soul upon the earth sees them, unless they have developed their spiritual senses. So when we pass to spirit, that personal history we weave while we live life is already written upon us, the soul we are, and is there to be read by anyone else in spirit. So as Frank says, the creations of the mind are what determine our happiness, or the contrary, when we pass to spirit. Frank goes on to expand upon his description of his own nature and why it caused him some difficulty when he passed to spirit. He says, I never had any of the love of God in my heart, except in a general way, which was, I suppose, of the same nature as the love for my family. But I am afraid, not to the extent that I loved them. And also, I rather prided myself on my own moral excellence, and supposed such qualities would be sufficient to make me a pretty happy spirit. But I soon found my mistake. When we come to offset our moral qualities against the evil thoughts and deeds of our earth life, they are largely in the minority and don't count for very much, while these evil thoughts and deeds, or rather the recollection of them, exist in our minds and memories. There's quite a lot in that when you read it carefully, but there are two things I would highlight. First, Frank is very clear that he knew only about natural human love when he lived upon the earth, and that divine love, or the love of God, was something he did not have. Given that he now knows that divine love is something distinct from natural human love, it seems that divine love is now something he shares in to some degree. The other point Frank makes is that living a reasonably moral life doesn't make up for all the evil thoughts we entertain. All those times when we imagine getting angry and winning an argument, or banging the table in front of someone, or fighting with them, or the many far worse things human beings imagine, possibly on a daily basis. Because these thought creations are also part of the life we are living, part of the personal history we are weaving. Frank is very clear in saying that these things, while we create and maintain them, are all part of who we are. It is so often said that as we think, so we are. Frank continues, well, it will do no good to rehearse the experience of my earth life now, but I found myself in darkness and suffering, and realized that I was paying the penalties for the sins that I had committed. But after a while, these recollections commenced to leave me, and I found that I was getting into more light and less suffering. But the movement was very slow, and at times hardly perceptible. After a while, I met some beautiful and loving spirits who seemed to take an interest in me, and told me the way to get rid of my sufferings and to reach the plains of light where happiness was. And I had to listen to them, for I saw that they were so superior to me, and they told me that they had been mortals like myself and had come up out of darkness and suffering, such as I was then undergoing. Now, Frank sounds to me like a decent guy who has been tarnished by his experience of this world. Heaven knows there are so many horrors in this world, it is difficult to avoid taking on board at least some of them. I know I have from time to time. Yet he does make his own progress in spirit, and even though it is painfully slow going for him, he reaches the point where he can perceive much more advanced spirits. And at that point, they know they can approach him without causing him embarrassment. And this is their opportunity to explain to Frank how he can make further progress. Frank continues, well, to make a long story short, I finally acted on their advice and found that way. And you will not be surprised when I tell you that the way was through and by the divine love of the Father. I tell you this because I know, and all the speculations of philosophers and religionists cannot bear a feather's weight in the argument against my no. Yes, I found this love, or rather it found me, and now I am very happy. And here we have the confirmation from Frank that his way forward was through seeking and sharing in divine love. He tells us that now I am in the third sphere and am trying my very hardest for more faith and more love. And I know that I will get it because I have before me every moment living examples in those who have received it to a wonderful degree and are still receiving it and progressing. I have to admit to feeling a little envious of Frank, in a way, because the knowledge of divine love can be difficult to get across and apply in this world. The vast majority of us do not have those living examples visible to us, and even those of us who are able to enjoy that privilege really just gets the odd glimpse. But obviously Frank earns our gratitude in taking the trouble to communicate such a clear description of his experience in spirit. Also, the personal testimony of people in spirit such as Frank, who have experienced the difference it makes to them to share in divine love, gives us very relatable examples of spiritual teachings in action. Frank, to his credit, is very humble and down to earth, and just sees his message in terms of an old friend telling James Padgett things that he thinks might be of interest to him. Frank concludes his message to James by saying, as we, in the long ago, were old chums and thought a great deal of each other, I thought that you would be interested in knowing that I am happy and a redeemed child of the Father, and on my way to spheres celestial. Well, I will not write more tonight, but sometimes I should like to come and have a real heart-to-heart chat about old times. For those are things of the past and not to be compared with what I have now in the way of experience. Yet, as you are on earth, I feel that we might both enjoy talking over old times, because we used to have some happy times together. So with all the old-time friendship and love, and with a new love too, I will say good night, Frank Davis. So a lovely letter, prompted by good old human affection and tenderness, but which contains some valuable pieces to fit into the puzzle of what things are like when we pass to spirit. And as she so often does, James Padgett's wife Helen comes in at the end of the evening's writing to do a little wrap-up. I am here, Helen. I come, and I'm glad to do so, as I have been waiting some time for some of your old earth friends to finish their writings. I rather enjoyed the last letter, for it showed me that earth ties of friendship still survive, for a while anyhow, in this world, and that a meeting of long-parted friends brings happiness. I see Mr. Davis quite often, and we talk of you, and of the times of your earth life. I also try to help him, and he is progressing, and he is in the right road to the high spheres. Well, sweetheart, I see that you are very tired and must stop, so I will not write longer, though I should like to do so very much. So give me a hug and a kiss, and say good night. Your own true and loving Helen. Interesting little comment by Helen when she refers to earthly friendships surviving for a while anyhow. Helen and others do explain that in spirit we are able to perceive more fully which individuals are truly on our personal wavelength. So even earth friendships or family relationships that have been very close may or may not continue in the long run. But that is a process that is allowed to unfold in its own time. Even if you know or learn that someone isn't going to be your bosom buddy forever, it is still possible to say farewell gently. In the next video in this midweek series, I'll take you through a message to James from a former judge, Frank Cyrick. We've heard from Judge Cyrick already back in video 2.6, but by the time of this next message, he has progressed to living in the 5th of the 7 spiritual spheres. The next video in the Divine Love series will be video 1017, due this coming Sunday, where we will be looking at a message from Jesus on the importance of developing the soul perceptions in order to perceive spiritual things that cannot be perceived by the material mind. Something he is keen to encourage as part of his efforts to share the knowledge of divine love. So I hope you'll find time to join me for one or other of those. As always, if you've enjoyed this video, please do take a moment to like and subscribe if you haven't already, as it does help to introduce the material to others, at least if the YouTube algorithms are doing their job. As always, thank you for taking the time to watch, and I'll see you next time. Take care until then. Bye-bye.